December 15, 2018, Studio 6B, NBC Studios. Mac Reynolds had been head of security for 12 years, the man who kept every secret safe. That's exactly why someone paid him $100,000 to destroy the tapes. 4 cameras captured what really happened backstage. Mac watched the footage once, made 2 phone calls, and walked those tapes straight to the incinerator. Case closed. Careers saved. Truth buried. December 15, 2018. Studio 6B, NBC Studios. Mac Reynolds had been head of security for 12 years, the man who kept every secret safe. That's exactly why someone paid him $100,000 to destroy the tapes. 4 cameras captured what really happened backstage. Mac watched the footage once, made 2 phone calls, and walked those tapes straight to the incinerator. Case closed. Careers saved. Truth buried. What happened in those missing 8 minutes became the most protected secret in television history. Network executives held emergency meetings because of it. And for 5 years, when people talked about that night, they never knew the real story. The night Mac Reynolds burned the evidence. The night he learned some secrets refused to stay dead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mac Reynolds pressed his back against the concrete wall of the parking garage, his breathing ragged in the December air. Blood seeped through his shirt sleeve where the bullet had grazed him. The footsteps echoed 3 levels below, getting closer. He clutched the manila envelope tighter against his chest. Inside were photographs that proved everything. The real reason he'd burned those tapes, the names behind the money, the conspiracy that went all the way to the 39th floor. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You should have stayed quiet, Mac." The voice was electronically distorted, but he recognized the cadence. 5 years of silence, and now this. The footsteps stopped echoing. Mac peered around the concrete pillar. Nothing but shadows and parked cars stretching toward the exit ramp. "The tapes are gone," Mac whispered into the phone. "I kept my end." "But you kept copies of other things, didn't you? Things you shouldn't have." Mac's jaw tightened. He had kept insurance, financial records, meeting transcripts, the real contracts. Standard practice for someone in his position. Someone who knew that in the entertainment industry, loyalty was a commodity with an expiration date. "What do you want?" "Same thing we've always wanted. Your silence. Permanent this time." The line went dead. Mac shoved the phone into his pocket and moved toward the stairwell. His shoulder burned with each step, but adrenaline pushed him forward. 20 years of protecting celebrities from stalkers, paparazzi, and their own worst impulses had taught him how to disappear. But this was different. This time, he was the target. The stairwell door slammed open behind him. Mac spun around to see a figure in a black tactical vest raising a suppressed pistol. He dove between 2 sedans as the first shot sparked off the concrete where his head had been. The second shot spiderwebbed the rear window of a BMW. Mac army crawled beneath the vehicles, using the cover to reach the down ramp. His mind raced through the events of the past week, the mysterious package that had arrived at his Chicago office, the surveillance footage he thought had been destroyed, the phone calls from blocked numbers. Someone had been planning this for months. He reached the edge of the parking level and looked down. 2 more figures in tactical gear were positioned at the exit, automatic weapons visible in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Professional, well-funded. This wasn't some random shakedown. His phone buzzed again. Text message, Level B2, Service Corridor, come alone. Max stared at the screen. B2 was the basement level, restricted access. He'd worked enough network security to know that service corridors were where bodies disappeared. But staying here meant certain death, and going down meant possible death. In his experience, possible always beat certain. The service elevator was 30 yards away across open space. Mac waited for the tactical team to move past his position, then sprinted. The elevator doors opened as he reached them. Too convenient, too easy. But he stepped inside anyway. The ride down felt eternal. Mac examined the photographs in the envelope one more time. Bank transfers totaling 8 figures, meeting notes with network executives, and at the bottom, a single sheet that made his blood run cold. A kill order with today's date and his name typed in corporate letterhead. The elevator opened to reveal a figure sitting in a chair in the middle of the service corridor. Someone Mac had trusted with his life. Someone who had been there the night everything went wrong. "Hello, Mac." Sarah Chen had been NBC's head of legal affairs for 15 years. She'd been in the emergency meetings after the incident, helped coordinate the cover-up, signed off on the payments. Now she sat in the dim basement lighting like she was conducting a board meeting. Sarah Mac kept his distance, the envelope hidden behind his back. "Fancy meeting you here. You always were too smart for your own good." She gestured to an empty chair across from her. "Sit. We need to talk. I'm comfortable standing. The men upstairs have orders to shoot you on sight if you try to leave. I'm the only reason you're still breathing." Mac remained standing but shifted his weight, calculating distances to the corridor exits. "What's this about? I kept the deal. The tapes are gone." "The tapes were never the real problem, Mac." "You were." Sarah's voice carried the same calm authority she'd used in contract negotiations. "You saw too much that night, heard too many names, learned too many details about how the industry really works. I've kept quiet for 5 years. But silence isn't enough anymore. The landscape has changed. Streaming wars, corporate mergers, congressional investigations into media monopolies. Old secrets have become new liabilities." Mac felt the weight of the photographs against his back. Insurance policies that might now be death warrants. "So, what happens now?" Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Now you disappear, Mac, completely. And the last witness to that night finally stops being a problem. What really happened in those 8 minutes? Who wanted Mac Reynolds dead, and why now? If this story has you hooked, make sure you're following, because tomorrow we dive deeper into the conspiracy that's been 5 years in the making." The weight of Sarah's words hung in the stale basement air like smoke from an old cigarette. Mac's mind drifted, unbidden, to a different time, before the paranoia, before the sleepless nights, before he'd learned that the people he'd sworn to protect were the same ones who'd eventually hunt him. 5 years ago, he'd been a different man. Marcus Reynolds, NBC security chief, with a corner office on the 32nd floor and a reputation that opened doors across the entertainment industry. He'd protected A-listers from overzealous fans, managed crisis situations that never made the tabloids, and built a life he'd actually been proud of. The memories surfaced without warning. Sunday morning in his Lincoln Park townhouse, Claire reading the Tribune at the kitchen island, while their daughter Emma practiced piano in the living room. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, her favorite piece. The sound had filled their home like a prayer, and Mac had stood in the doorway watching his wife's face soften as she listened. Claire had looked up, caught him staring, and smiled that crooked smile that had made him propose 13 years earlier. "What?" she'd asked, setting down her coffee mug, the ceramic one Emma had made in art class, glazed in uneven blues and greens. "Just this," Mac had said, gesturing to encompass everything. The Sunday light streaming through their windows, the smell of French toast cooling on the counter, the way Emma's dark hair fell across her shoulders as she played. "I want to remember this exact moment." Claire had laughed, that musical sound that always made his chest tight with something he couldn't name. "You're getting sentimental in your old age, Mac Reynolds." He'd been 53 then, 5 years and a lifetime ago. Now, standing in this basement corridor that smelled of industrial cleaning supplies and concrete dust, Mac realized what he'd been protecting all these years wasn't just his own life. It was that moment, that Sunday morning version of himself who believed the world made sense, who thought good people got rewarded and bad people got punished, who came home to piano music and crooked smiles. The divorce papers had been served 6 months after the incident. Claire had tried to understand why he'd suddenly become distant, why he'd stopped sleeping, why he'd started checking the locks obsessively and installing security cameras throughout their house. But how could he explain that he'd watched 2 powerful men destroy each other in 8 minutes, and then spent the next week helping even more powerful people bury the truth? Emma had been 14 when he'd moved out. She'd stopped playing piano around the same time. "You're thinking about them," Sarah said, her voice cutting through his reverie. She'd always been able to read him too well. "Your family." Mac's jaw tightened. "Don't." "Emma's at Northwestern now, isn't she? Pre-med, like her mother wanted. Dean's List 3 semesters running. Sarah consulted her phone with the casual air of someone reading a weather report. Claire's practice is doing well. That malpractice case she handled last year really put her on the map. They have a nice life, Mac. Quiet, safe. The threat was delivered with surgical precision. Mac felt something cold settle in his stomach, the same feeling he'd had the night everything started unraveling. The night he'd walked into that backstage area and witnessed something that would change the trajectory of his entire existence. They don't know anything, Mac said quietly. Of course they don't. You've been very careful about that. Sarah stood up, smoothing her charcoal suit. Even in a basement corridor surrounded by armed men, she looked like she belonged in a boardroom. But accidents happen, Mac, even to people who think they're safe. Mac thought about Emma's last text message, sent 3 days ago. Dad, can we grab coffee when you're back in town? I know things have been weird, but I miss talking to you. He'd stared at that message for 20 minutes before responding with something non-committal about his schedule being crazy. Now he wondered if he'd ever see her again. If he'd ever get the chance to explain why he'd become the kind of father who disappeared from his daughter's life, why he'd chosen protecting her from a distance over being present and vulnerable. The photographs in his hand felt heavier now. Insurance policies had seemed like wisdom 5 years ago, leverage to ensure his family's safety. But insurance policies could become liability policies. Evidence could become targets painted on the backs of everyone you loved. What do you want, Sarah? I want you to walk away. Tonight. Permanently. She gestured to a door at the far end of the corridor. There's a car waiting. Clean papers, enough money to start over somewhere warm. Disappear completely, and your family stays safe. Keep fighting, and she didn't need to finish. Mac understood the mathematics of survival. He'd learned them that night backstage, when he'd realized that truth was a luxury people like him couldn't afford. The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell above. Sarah's insurance policy, making sure he understood his options were limited. Mac closed his eyes and heard piano music. The piano music wasn't a memory this time. Mac's eyes snapped open as the sound drifted down through the ventilation system. Actual notes, being played somewhere in the building above them. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The same piece Emma had been practicing that Sunday morning 5 years ago. Sarah's composed expression flickered for just a moment. That's not possible. But Mac was already moving toward the sound, his PI instincts overriding the immediate danger. In 20 years of security work, he'd learned to trust the details that didn't fit. Random coincidences were rarely random, especially when they involved his family's safety. The music stopped abruptly, replaced by the electronic buzz of the building's PA system crackling to life. Mr. Reynolds. The voice that filled the corridor was young, female, and terrifyingly familiar. My name is Emma Reynolds. I'm in the main lobby with some very interesting footage that my father thought was destroyed 5 years ago. Mac's world tilted on its axis. The envelope fell from his numb fingers, photographs scattering across the concrete floor like fallen leaves. If anyone harms him, Emma's voice continued through the speakers, steady despite the slight tremor that told Mac she was fighting to stay calm. This footage goes live on every social media platform simultaneously. I've already uploaded it to 7 different servers with deadman switches. You have 10 minutes to bring him to the lobby, unharmed. Sarah was already on her radio, barking orders in a voice stripped of its earlier composure. How the hell did she... Get here, Mac finished, his mind racing. Emma had always been brilliant, but this level of planning suggested she'd known about tonight's ambush, which meant she'd been watching him, probably for weeks. She's my daughter. The tactical team's footsteps thundered overhead as they repositioned. Mac could hear Sarah's men coordinating through their comms, voices tight with professional concern. A hostage situation with a college student in the lobby of a public building wasn't something they could resolve quietly. Dad, Emma's voice came through the speakers again, softer now, meant just for him. I know you think you've been protecting us by staying away. But I found your insurance files 6 months ago, all of them. I've been trying to figure out how to help you ever since. Mac's chest constricted. The safety deposit box in Emma's name. He'd established it as a final failsafe, never imagining she'd actually access it. The key had been hidden in her childhood jewelry box, something he'd thought she'd forgotten about when she left for college. She's seen everything, he whispered, more to himself than to Sarah. Then she's a liability too, Sarah replied, her corporate mask fully back in place. She spoke into her radio again. Change of plans. Secure the girl, quietly. No. The word came out harder than Mac intended. He stepped toward Sarah, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something other than fear. You touch my daughter, and every news organization in Chicago gets those files by morning. Emma's not stupid, Sarah. If she's here, she's not here alone. As if summoned by his words, Emma's voice returned to the PA system. Oh, and I should mention, I'm here with my boyfriend Marcus Hoffman. His father owns the Tribune. We're also live streaming on his Instagram account, which has about 40,000 followers. So, lots of witnesses. Sarah's face had gone pale beneath her professional composure. Mac could see her calculating the exposure, the risk assessment spreadsheet running behind her eyes. A public confrontation in a building lobby, with media connections and social media documentation, was exactly the kind of scenario that turned cover-ups into congressional investigations. You taught her well, Sarah said bitterly. I didn't teach her anything, Mac replied. But even as he said it, he realized it wasn't true. Emma had been watching him her entire childhood, seeing how he approached problems, how he planned for contingencies, how he protected people. She'd learned by osmosis, the way children always do. The PA crackled again, but this time it was a different voice. Young, male, nervous. Mr. Reynolds? This is Marcus Hoffman. We can see armed men positioning around the lobby through the security feeds Emma hacked. Just so you know, we've already called the police. They should be here in about 3 minutes. Mac looked at the photographs scattered on the floor around his feet. Financial records, meeting transcripts, evidence of conspiracy that reached the highest levels of network television. His insurance policies, his leverage, his burden. Emma had seen it all, understood what it meant, and instead of running from it, she'd run toward it. She'd run toward him. Looks like the game's changed, Sarah, Mac said, feeling something he hadn't experienced in 5 years, hope. My daughter just gave us both a new set of rules. The sound of sirens began echoing from the street above, growing louder by the second. The sirens cut through the basement air like accusations, and Mac watched Sarah's carefully constructed plan disintegrate in real time. Her radio crackled with increasingly urgent reports, police vehicles approaching from 3 directions, news van pulling up across the street. Sir, we have a problem. Someone's jamming our communications upstairs. Mac almost smiled. Emma had always been thorough with her school projects, too. Stand down, Sarah ordered into her radio, the words coming out like broken glass. Full withdrawal, clean exit protocols. But Mac could hear the confusion in the responses, the kind of professional panic that happened when private security operations collided with public scrutiny. These weren't the sort of men who could simply blend into a crowd of concerned citizens. They were tactical specialists, and their presence in a downtown office building would be impossible to explain once the police started asking questions. You're thinking we can just walk away from this, Max said, watching Sarah's face. Pretend tonight never happened. Tonight is a minor setback, she replied, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. Your daughter may have bought you some time, but she's also painted a target on herself. Do you really think the people behind this will just forget because a college student live-streamed from a lobby? Mac felt the familiar weight of protective instinct, the same feeling that had driven every decision for the past 5 years. But something had shifted. Emma wasn't a child anymore. She was a young woman who'd spent months planning an operation that would have impressed his old security team. She'd outmaneuvered professionals with decades of experience. Maybe, Mac said quietly, but now she's not facing them alone. The tactical team's footsteps echoed overhead as they moved toward the exit routes. Mac could track their positions by sound, a skill that had kept him alive in less forgiving situations. Sarah's people were good, but they were also rushing now, making the kind of mistakes that happened when careful plans met unexpected variables. Walk away, Mac. Sarah was already moving toward the service elevator, her composure returning as she calculated her next moves. Take your daughter and disappear. You have maybe 6 hours before this becomes a different kind of problem. What kind of problem? Sarah paused at the elevator doors, and for a moment, Mac saw something in her expression that might have been genuine concern. the kind where being dead would be a mercy. The elevator doors closed, leaving Mac alone with the scattered photographs and the sound of sirens growing closer. He knelt and began gathering the evidence. 5 years of insurance policies that had become liability policies the moment Emma decided to act. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, service stairs to your left. Emma's waiting on sublevel 1. She says to tell you the coast is clear, but to hurry. Mac looked around the empty corridor. No cameras visible, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Someone had been watching him long enough to orchestrate tonight's ambush, which meant they'd also been watching long enough to learn his patterns, his weaknesses, his pressure points. The message could be genuine help, or the next move in a game he still didn't fully understand. He chose to trust his daughter. The service stairs were exactly where the text indicated, hidden behind a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Mac climbed towards sublevel 1, his shoulder burning with each step. The sound of police radios echoed down from street level, multiple units, probably coordinating with building security to establish a perimeter. Emma was waiting in what looked like a maintenance room, surrounded by server racks and electrical panels. She'd changed out of whatever she'd worn to the lobby, now dressed in dark clothing that would help her move unseen through the building's service areas. Even in the harsh fluorescent lighting, Mac could see Claire's determined expression in their daughter's face. "Hi, Dad." Emma's voice was steady, but Mac caught the slight tremor that meant she was running on adrenaline and caffeine. "We need to talk. We need to get you out of here," Mac replied, moving toward her. "This is bigger than you understand." "No." Emma stepped back, and Mac saw something in her posture that stopped him cold. Not fear, resolve. "This is exactly as big as I understand. I've been tracking Sarah Chen's financial connections for 3 months. I know about the shell companies, the media acquisitions, the network restructuring. I know who's really behind what happened 5 years ago." Mac felt the bottom drop out of his world for the second time that night. "Emma, you don't know what you're—" "The Meridian Group," Emma interrupted. "Private equity firm that's been buying up media companies across the country. They own 40% of cable news, 60% of streaming platforms, and they've been systematically eliminating anyone who might have evidence of their early methods." Mac stared at his daughter, really looked at her, and realized she wasn't just brilliant, she was dangerous. The kind of dangerous that came from having nothing left to lose and everything to prove. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "About you? 6 months. About them?" Emma's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Since yesterday, when they tried to kill you." Mac felt the maintenance room walls closing in around him. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like insects, casting harsh shadows that made Emma look older than her 20 years. "When she said they tried to kill you." The words hung in the recycled air between them like a confession neither was ready to hear. "Yesterday was supposed to look like an accident," Emma continued, pulling out her phone and swiping through what looked like surveillance footage. "Black sedan, license plate registered to a shell company owned by Meridian. They've been watching your apartment for weeks, Dad, learning your routines." Mac watched himself on the tiny screen, walking to his corner bodega, buying coffee, checking his mail, living the carefully constructed life of a man trying to remain invisible. "How did you—" "Traffic cameras. Security feeds from the buildings across the street. Marcus helped me access them." Emma's fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. His journalism classes taught him how to track public records, cross-reference corporate filings. "We make a good team." The casual way she said it made Mac's chest tighten. His daughter had spent months building the kind of intelligence network that had taken him years to develop, and she'd done it while maintaining a pre-med course load and apparently dating someone whose father owned a major newspaper. "Emma, you can't understand what you're risking. The people behind this destroyed Jimmy Fallon's career and Kanye West's reputation to cover up something bigger." Emma's voice was steady, but Mac caught the edge of anger underneath. "I know what happened that night, Dad. I've read your files, all of them." Mac sank against the server rack behind him, feeling older than his 58 years. The safety deposit box had contained everything: witness statements, financial records, audio recordings he'd made as insurance. evidence of a conspiracy that reached from network executives to private equity boards to political figures who'd benefited from controlling entertainment industry narratives. "Then you know why I had to disappear from your life," he said quietly. "I know what you thought you had to do." Emma moved closer, and in the harsh light, Mac could see the exhaustion in her face, the weight she'd been carrying since discovering the truth about her father's exile. "But I also know what really happened in that backstage area, what you witnessed, what they made you cover up." The memory hit Mac like a physical blow. That night 5 years ago, when he'd been called to handle what should have been a simple celebrity incident. Instead, he'd walked into a room where two powerful men had destroyed each other over something that went far beyond entertainment industry politics. What had started as a personal confrontation had revealed a conspiracy involving media manipulation, political influence, and millions of dollars in illegal campaign contributions. "It wasn't just about the slap," Mac said, the words coming out like a confession. "That was just the catalyst. When they started investigating what led to the incident, they would have uncovered the money trail. The foreign investments in American media companies, the coordinated messaging campaigns, everything." Emma nodded, and Mac realized she'd already connected those dots. "So they made it disappear, made everyone involved disappear, except you. I was useful. I knew how to keep secrets." Mac's laugh was bitter, "until I became a liability instead of an asset." The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell above. Emma glanced at her phone, then at the service tunnel that led deeper into the building's infrastructure. "Marcus is coordinating with the police upstairs, but we don't have much time. Sarah's people are regrouping. You shouldn't have come here, Emma. You should have taken what you found and gone to the FBI, the press." "The FBI?" Emma's voice cracked for the first time since Mac had found her in this room. "Dad, 3 of the agents who would have handled this case received consulting fees from Meridian Group subsidiaries last year. And the press? Marcus's father won't touch this story without corroboration from someone who was actually there that night." Mac understood what she was asking. The one thing he'd sworn never to do: go on record, testify about what he'd witnessed, break the silence that had kept his family safe but destroyed everything else. "If I talk, they won't just come after me," he said. "They'll come after you, your mother. They're already coming after us." Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She read it and went pale. "Marcus says there are men watching Mom's house. Professional surveillance, not police." Mac felt the last pieces of his carefully constructed isolation crumble. For 5 years, he'd believed that staying away from Claire and Emma would protect them, that his exile was a sacrifice that would keep them safe from the consequences of what he'd witnessed. Now he realized his silence had only delayed the inevitable. The people behind that night's cover-up weren't content with his disappearance. They wanted to eliminate every possible threat to their operations, and that included anyone Mac might have told the truth to, even if he'd never told them anything at all. "Show me everything," Mac said, the words feeling like surrender and resurrection at the same time. "Every file, every connection, every piece of evidence you've gathered. It's time to stop running." Emma's fingers flew across her laptop screen, pulling up files that made Mac's blood turn to ice water. Financial records, meeting transcripts, surveillance photos, but not the ones he'd hidden in the safety deposit box. These were different, more recent, more damning. "This is what I found when I started digging deeper," Emma said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The Meridian Group didn't just cover up what happened that night, Dad. They orchestrated it." Mac stared at the screen, watching security footage he'd never seen before. The timestamp showed 3 hours before the incident he'd witnessed, before the confrontation between Fallon and West that had changed everything. In the grainy video, 2 figures stood in what looked like a network conference room. One was Sarah Chen. The other was someone Mac recognized but had never connected to that night. "No," Mac whispered, his voice barely audible over the humming servers. "That's not possible." "David Morrison, NBC's head of talent relations," Emma said quietly. "The man who called you to handle the situation that night. He's been on Meridian's payroll for 3 years, Dad. This footage came from his personal security system. He never knew his assistant was recording their meetings. Mac watched the silent video, reading Morrison's lips as he gestured toward what looked like building schematics. Sarah nodded, pointing to specific locations. They were planning something, coordinating something. "Keep watching," Emma said. The timestamp jumped forward by 30 minutes. Now Morrison was on his phone, and the audio quality was clear enough to hear his side of the conversation. "Yes, we're moving forward tonight. The security chief doesn't know. He'll think he's responding to a real incident. By the time he realizes what he's witnessing, it'll be too late to change the narrative." Mac felt the maintenance room spin around him. 5 years of guilt, 5 years of believing he'd failed to protect two men from their own worst impulses, 5 years of carrying the weight of what he'd witnessed. And it had all been theater. "They set it up," he said, the words tasting like ash. "The whole thing, the confrontation, the recording, my response. They needed a credible witness," Emma continued, pulling up another file. "Someone with an impeccable reputation for discretion. Someone who would see what they wanted him to see and then keep quiet about it for all the right reasons." The audio continued. "Make sure Reynolds gets there just as things escalate. He needs to believe he's saving the situation, not documenting it. His testimony about what happened will be crucial if anyone starts asking questions later." Mac remembered that night with crystalline clarity. The call from Morrison, urgent but not panicked. The careful timing of his arrival. The way both Fallon and West had seemed almost surprised to see him, as if they'd expected someone else, or no one at all. "The slap was real," Emma said softly. "The anger was real, but the reasons behind it, the location, the timing, all of that was manipulated. They spent months researching both men's psychological profiles, finding their pressure points, creating a situation where they'd react exactly as predicted." Mac thought about Morrison's voice on the phone that night, how he'd emphasized the need for absolute discretion, how he'd made it clear that Mac's job was to contain the situation, not investigate it, how grateful he'd seemed when Mac had suggested they handle everything internally. "I was never protecting them," Mac said, understanding flooding through him like poison. "I was protecting the cover-up. And when they were done with you, they made you disappear too." Emma's voice carried the weight of months of investigation, of piecing together a conspiracy that had destroyed her family. The death threats, the pressure to resign, the story that your security protocols had failed, all of it was designed to drive you away before you could realize what you'd really witnessed. The footsteps in the stairwell were getting closer, but Mac barely heard them. He was remembering Morrison's face at his resignation meeting, the careful expression of disappointment mixed with relief, the way Sarah had handled his transition out of the company, efficient and thorough and just concerned enough to seem genuine. "They were afraid I'd figure it out eventually," Mac said. "No, Dad." Emma closed the laptop and stood, slinging it into a backpack that looked like it had been packed for a quick exit. "They were afraid you'd remember what you actually saw that night. Because according to this audio, you witnessed something else, something that wasn't part of their plan." Mac felt his memory shift, like looking at an optical illusion that suddenly resolved into a different image entirely. That night, in those crucial minutes before he'd focused on the confrontation between Fallon and West, he'd seen something else, someone else, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Sarah's biggest mistake, Emma said, heading toward the service tunnel, was assuming you'd never figure out that the real crime wasn't what happened between two celebrities. It was what you saw them covering up in the first place. The service tunnel stretched ahead of them like a concrete throat, lit by emergency strips that cast their shadows in stuttering intervals. Mac followed Emma deeper into the building's infrastructure, his mind reeling with the implications of what she'd revealed. Every step echoed his growing certainty that this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment he'd walked away 5 years ago. "Tell me about the person who wasn't supposed to be there," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. The laptop bag bounced against her hip as she navigated the narrow passage with practiced ease. Mac closed his eyes, forcing himself back to that night, past the carefully orchestrated confrontation, past Morrison's calculated timing, past his own assumptions about what he was witnessing. In the moments before the slap that had dominated headlines for months, he'd glimpsed someone in the background. Someone whose presence had registered as wrong, but had been immediately forgotten in the chaos that followed. Senator Catherine Walsh, Mac said, the name emerging from his memory like a photograph developing in slow motion. She was supposed to be in Washington that night, voting on the media consolidation bill. Emma stopped walking. The bill that would have prevented foreign investment in American broadcast networks. The one that died in committee 3 weeks later. She was there for maybe 2 minutes. I saw her leaving through the back exit while Morrison was briefing me on the situation. Mac remembered the moment clearly now. Walsh's distinctive silver hair, her careful stride, the way she'd avoided eye contact with anyone in the corridor. At the time, I assumed she'd been visiting someone privately. Celebrity endorsement, campaign contribution, the usual backroom politics. But if she was there during the setup, Emma resumed walking, but Mac could hear the excitement in her voice, the pieces clicking together. She wasn't just a witness. She was a participant. Mac felt the weight of understanding settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Whatever Meridian was planning, Walsh was part of it. The confrontation wasn't just meant to destroy 2 careers. It was meant to provide cover for something else happening that night. They emerged from the tunnel into what looked like a utility room. Emma checked her phone, then moved to a small window that looked out onto the street level. Police cars lined the block, their red and blue lights painting the walls in shifting colors. But Mac noticed something else. Black sedans parked at strategic intervals, their occupants watching the official response with professional detachment. Marcus texted again, Emma said, reading from her screen. He's with the police upstairs, but they're being told to stand down. Someone with federal authority just arrived and took over the scene. Mac wasn't surprised. The kind of people who could orchestrate a 5-year cover-up didn't leave crime scenes to local law enforcement. They had resources, connections, the ability to make problems disappear through official channels. We can't stay here, he said, but Emma was already shaking her head. We can't run either, not anymore. She pulled out a second phone. This one looked different, more sophisticated. I've been in contact with someone else, Dad. Someone who's been investigating Meridian from a different angle. Mac felt his chest tighten. Emma, tell me you haven't... Claire Nakamura, investigative journalist with the Washington Herald. She's been tracking political corruption cases involving media companies for 2 years. Emma's fingers moved across the phone screen. I sent her everything 3 hours ago. Financial records, audio files, the surveillance footage. She's already confirmed Senator Walsh's whereabouts that night through Senate security logs. The name hit Mac like a physical blow. Claire Nakamura had built her reputation on exposing the kind of high-level corruption that destroyed careers and sent powerful people to federal prison. She was also known for protecting her sources, even when it meant facing contempt of court charges. If Nakamura has the story, Mac began, it goes live in 6 hours, unless something happens to the evidence, or the sources. Emma's voice was steady, but Mac could see the fear in her eyes now. The understanding that they'd just declared war on people who made problems disappear permanently. Mac's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but he answered anyway. Mac Reynolds. Sarah Chen's voice was calm, but underneath it Mac heard something he'd never associated with her before. Desperation. You need to understand what you're risking. This isn't just about you anymore. I know, Mac said, looking at his daughter's determined face. That's what makes it so dangerous for you. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Sarah spoke again, her composure was gone. The story can't break, Mac. Too many people have too much to lose, including people who won't hesitate to eliminate every person connected to those files. Then maybe it's time for those people to lose something, Mac replied, and ended the call. Emma was watching him with an expression Mac recognized from her childhood. The look she got when she'd made a decision that couldn't be changed. No going back now, she said quietly. Mac nodded, feeling something settle in his chest that he hadn't experienced in 5 years. Not peace exactly, but purpose. No going back. Emma's second phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Her face went ashen as she read it, and Mac knew their 6-hour deadline had just collapsed. Nakamura's dead, Emma whispered, her voice hollow. Car accident 20 minutes ago. Single vehicle. Lost control on the Roosevelt Bridge. She looked up at Mac, tears threatening but not falling. They got to her before the story could publish. Mac felt the familiar weight of inevitability settle over him. The same sensation he'd experienced 5 years ago when he'd realized the cover-up was bigger than just protecting two celebrities. But this time, instead of paralyzing him, it crystallized his resolve. "Then we finish what she started," he said, reaching for the phone. "Who else has copies of the files?" "Just us. And Marcus, but he's—" Emma's phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, but when she answered, a different voice emerged. "Miss Reynolds." Sarah Chen sounded tired, as if the evening had aged her years and hours. "Your friend is unharmed, but he's helping us understand the scope of what you've uncovered. I think it's time we all had a conversation." Mac took the phone from Emma's trembling hands. "Where?" "Where it all began. Studio 6 Billions, 1 hour." Sarah's pause carried the weight of decades. "Come alone, Mac. Both of you. No police, no backup. This ends tonight one way or another." The line went dead. Emma stared at her father, reading the decision in his eyes before he spoke it. "We can't trust her," she said. "No, but we can't run anymore either." Mac checked his watch, 10:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, it would be exactly 5 years since he'd first walked into that studio to handle what he'd thought was a simple celebrity incident. "And Marcus doesn't deserve to pay for our choices." They moved through the building's service corridors like ghosts, Emma's knowledge of the layout guiding them past security cameras and occupied offices. The NBC building at night felt like a mausoleum of dreams. Empty editing bays where tomorrow's entertainment was assembled, dark offices where careers were built and destroyed with equal efficiency. Studio 6 Billions looked exactly as Mac remembered it. The same layout, the same lighting setup, even the same coffee-stained craft services table in the corner. But now he saw it differently. Not as the scene of a random confrontation between two volatile personalities, but as a carefully designed stage for a performance that had destroyed lives while protecting billion-dollar interests. Marcus sat in one of the interview chairs, his hands zip-tied but his face defiant. Sarah Chen stood beside him, looking smaller somehow than she had in Mac's memory. David Morrison flanked her, his usually perfect composure cracked around the edges. "You look older, Mac," Sarah said without preamble. 5 years of exile will do that to a man. So will 5 years of carrying someone else's guilt. Mac stepped into the studio with Emma close behind him. "Turns out it's lighter when you know it was never yours to begin with." Sarah's smile was sad, almost nostalgic. "You always were too ethical for this business. I told Morrison from the beginning that using you was a mistake. You cared too much about the truth to stay bought. Is that what this was about? Keeping me bought?" Mac felt Emma tense beside him as Morrison stepped forward. "It was about protecting American interests," Morrison said, his voice carrying the rehearsed cadence of a man who'd repeated this justification countless times. Foreign investment in American media was reaching dangerous levels. The Walsh bill would have stopped it, but the senator needed persuasion. Mac understood. The footage was never about Fallon and West. It was blackmail material to use against Walsh. Senator Walsh had been accepting campaign contributions from Chinese shell companies for 3 years, Sarah said quietly. The confrontation between Fallon and West was meant to provide cover for her presence here that night. She thought she was coming to discuss a simple endorsement deal. Instead, we presented her with evidence of her violations and offered her a choice. "Vote against her own bill or face public exposure," Emma said, her voice cutting through the studio's artificial atmosphere like a blade. But something went wrong. Sarah nodded toward Morrison. "David got greedy, thought he could expand the operation, use what we'd learned to manipulate other politicians. He started recording conversations without authorization, keeping files he shouldn't have kept." Morrison's face flushed with anger and fear. "You're making me the scapegoat for decisions we made together. The Meridian Group wanted results, and I delivered them. You delivered chaos." Sarah's composure finally cracked completely. Mac saw Walsh leaving that night. Eventually, he was going to remember. Eventually, he was going to start asking questions. Your solution was to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. That was never the plan. Mac watched Sarah's face as the truth emerged. Not the version he'd reconstructed from Emma's files, but the complete picture. Sarah hadn't been the mastermind. She'd been trying to contain Morrison's escalating paranoia, to limit the damage from an operation that had spiraled far beyond its original scope. "Claire Nakamura," Mac said quietly. "Did you—" "That wasn't us." Sarah's voice broke slightly. "Morrison hired freelancers, people with no connection to Meridian, no oversight. When you and Emma started investigating, he panicked." Morrison pulled a gun from his jacket with shaking hands. "It ends here, all of it. The witnesses, the evidence, the liability." He aimed first at Marcus, then swung toward Mac. "You should have stayed disappeared." The shot echoed through Studio 6 billions like a thunderclap. But it wasn't Morrison who fired. Sarah Chen stood holding a smoking pistol, watching Morrison's body crumple to the floor. Her face showed no satisfaction, only exhaustion. "5 years too late," she said softly. "But some debts can only be paid one way." The silence that followed stretched like a held breath. Mac moved slowly toward Marcus, his fingers working at the zip ties while Sarah made no move to stop him. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the studio's familiar scent of industrial carpet and old coffee. "It's over," Sarah said, letting the gun fall from her hand. It clattered against the floor with a hollow finality. "The Meridian files, Morrison's recordings, all of it. I'm turning everything over to federal prosecutors." Emma stared at Morrison's body, her face pale but resolute. "What about Senator Walsh?" "She resigned 3 days ago. Cited health concerns." Sarah sank into one of the interview chairs as if her legs could no longer support her. The Chinese money trail Emma uncovered was just the beginning. Morrison had enough evidence to destroy half the Senate. Mac helped Marcus to his feet, noting the tremor in his old friend's hands. 5 years of running, and it had ended exactly where it began, in this sterile room where truth and performance blurred beyond recognition. "Claire Nakamura," Mac said quietly. "Was that really an accident?" Sarah closed her eyes. "Morrison hired a cleaner from Baltimore. I didn't know until after." She looked up at Emma with something that might have been regret. "Your investigation forced his hand. He was already planning to eliminate anyone who could connect him to the original operation." The studio felt smaller now, crowded with ghosts and consequences. Mac remembered standing in this same spot 5 years ago, thinking he was protecting 2 careers from their own mistakes. Now he understood he'd been protecting something much larger and far more corrupt. "Where do we go from here?" Emma asked. Sarah stood slowly, looking older than her years. "You go home. All of you. The federal investigation will need your testimony, but Morrison's files contain enough evidence to prosecute the conspiracy without putting you at further risk." Max studied her face, searching for the deception that had defined their relationship for so long. Instead, he saw only exhaustion and something that might have been relief. "Why now?" he asked. "After 5 years, why end it now?" "Because Morrison was right about one thing," Sarah replied. "It was never going to stop. The blackmail, the cover-ups, the body count, it would have kept growing until it consumed everyone involved." She gestured toward Morrison's body. "Including me." 3 hours later, Max stood outside the NBC building, watching federal agents carry evidence boxes to unmarked vans. The morning sun painted the glass facade in shades of gold, making the building look almost innocent in the early light. Emma stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm with a weight that felt both protective and protective. "You okay?" she asked. Mac considered the question. For 5 years, he'd carried the guilt of what he thought was his failure to protect 2 people from destroying each other. Learning that the destruction had been orchestrated didn't erase the damage, but it shifted the weight of it onto different shoulders. "I keep thinking about Nakamura," he said. "If I'd figured this out sooner, you'd probably be dead too." Emma's voice was gentle but firm. Morrison wasn't going to let anyone expose this. Not you, not me, not a journalist with federal protection. Marcus emerged from the building looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. The federal agents had questioned him for 2 hours, but his role as an unwitting pawn had been quickly established. He joined them on the sidewalk, squinting in the morning light. "They're offering witness protection," he said. "All of us." Max shook his head. "I'm tired of hiding." "Good." Emma said. Because I'm opening a practice in Chicago, investigative consulting for corporate fraud cases. I could use a partner who knows where the bodies are buried. For the first time in years, Mac smiled. Not the careful, guarded expression he'd perfected during his exile, but something genuine. I thought you were done with family business. This isn't family business, Dad. It's justice business. She squeezed his arm. We make a good team. 6 months later, Mac sat in his old apartment above the PI office, reading the Washington Herald's expose on the Meridian conspiracy. Senator Walsh had been indicted on 14 counts of corruption. 3 other senators were under investigation. The foreign investment bill had been reintroduced and passed unanimously. Sarah Chen had received a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation. 12 years, with possibility of parole in 7. Morrison's body had been quietly buried, his estate seized by the federal government to compensate victims of the conspiracy. The article mentioned Mac's role in exposing the cover-up, but didn't dwell on his 5 years of exile. Some stories, he'd learned, were too complex for newspaper columns. Emma knocked on his door, holding 2 cups of coffee and a new case file. Insurance fraud, she announced. Simple, honest, straightforward insurance fraud. No celebrities, no senators, no international conspiracies. Mac took the coffee and opened the file. After everything they'd been through, chasing mundane corruption felt almost luxurious. Sounds perfect, he said, and meant it.